Is China actually decoupling? I know that I did a video not too long ago basically saying that they cannot do without each other. I had done a video early on, way past, which basically stated that China was in the process of decoupling. They didn't really need anyone anymore. They just wanted to go after, the Russian and the Indian and the whole Asia market more than anything else. I'm looking at the rhetoric, and it seems to be a bit tougher. The rhetoric has changed quite a bit, and it's impacting the market. So, not that I'm changing my mind completely, but I just want to make sure we are on the same page and we're looking at the same thing and we understand what's going on, which at the end of the day, that is the most important thing to do. For months now, global markets have been on hedge. Each headline, another tariff, another export restriction, another warning shot, and it's going now as we speak. Is this something that we really need to worry about? The phrase might sound extreme, but look closer. China isn't simply reacting, it's recalibrating. Export controls on rare earth, lithium, graphite, and even AI-related components aren't random policy move. They're chess pieces in a long game. They're moving pieces on the board here. Should we be worried about? At the heart of this is China's dual circulation strategy. Because don't forget, there is a plan for China and the US to meet very soon. A plan to build internal strength while selectively decoupling from areas where Western sanction or controls could bite hardest. It's not isolation, it's insulation. And it's been a motion since 2020. So we need to be fully aware of that, because we might actually be experiencing an actual decoupling. Could this actually be? Now, if that insulation expands, right? If Beijing truly pulls back, it won't just hit supply chains. It could reshape global inflation, energy transitions, and even the defense sector access to critical materials. In other words, decoupling isn't just a political concept anymore. It's a market reality waiting to happen, and this is probably why we have seen the market reacting the way it has, as it has reacted quite strongly very recently. That is something to worry about. So let's explore and let's try to understand what is going on, because it would appear to be that there's some chances of actual decoupling. So let's have a breakdown as to what has happened and what Bessent, because right now China is supposed to meet, the premier is supposed to meet with Trump very soon, and Bessent is out there preparing the terrain, right? Preparing the terrain for whatever comes up next. Is he serious? Is he pushing? Is his strategy? Let's find out. So Bessent has warned that China's expanded export controls on rare earth and critical materials could force other nations to decouple. And that's basically what has been happening, right? He frames the decoupling as something the world would prefer to avoid, but that signals from China's policies are pushing in that direction. They're pushing hard right now. They're pushing very hard, maybe harder than I thought they would. Maybe they need a reason to decouple, right? However, Bessent has tried to nuance the message. The U.S. doesn't want a broad, sweeping decoupling. Instead, the goal is to de-risk, to reduce dependence on strategic areas. And you've seen the U.S. going out and basically pushing more in terms of rare earth minerals, investing in these companies more in the U.S., trying to diversify. But you need to realize that it would take the U.S. 10 to 12 years to totally eliminate China. So think about that for a second. He's made a distinction between general decoupling, disentangling the entire U.S.-China economic relationship, and targeted decoupling for critical sectors. But make No mistakes here. This has started. This has actually started. Slowly, is this the time? Probably not. But is this going to be it? It could be it. So Bessent's talk is partly rhetorical, he's sending warning, raising the stakes, and partly strategic, justifying shift in supply chain policy. So what are the main drivers? What are the main drivers behind this rhetoric? China export controls. China is introducing stricter licensing requirements for exports of goods containing rare earth, critical materials, etc. The idea is that even if product only contains a small amount of these inputs, exporter must seek Chinese government permission. Right? You have an inkling of it, you got to seek permission, and that's a problem, right? Because the U.S. and other views these restrictions as a form of economic coercion. Right? You're coercing into using control over critical inputs to influence geopolitical or trade behavior. Now, keep in mind that the U.S. has done the same thing, but on different instances. Bessent rhetoric warns that if China acts unreliably, switching off the supply, imposing ad hoc controls, then other countries will have no choice but to decouple. You got to do without it. The supply chain resilience. After disruption from COVID, geopolitical tensions, the U.S. has been rethinking supply chain dependency. Remember what happened during COVID, right? It was a tough time. You couldn't get masks, forget toilet paper, especially in sectors tied to defense tech, semiconductors, critical minerals. The idea is, even if it's costly in the short term, it may be prudent to reduce over-reliance on China in key areas. And signaling and leveraging negotiation. By elevating the stakes, Bessent signals seriousness. The meeting hasn't gone, but they want to be serious this time. Its negotiating posture is either China backs off restricting policies, or it risks being isolated in critical sectors. This also gives the U.S. more flexibility to justify subsidies, incentives, or protection measures in response. So this is getting interesting, to say the least. Do they actually want to do it now? Are they ready? So how consistent and credible is this talk? Let me give you 4 points on that. The first one is Bessent has said the U.S. doesn't want a blanket decoupling. The goal is to avoid catastrophic damage to interlinked economies. The ideas of strategic decoupling is more acceptable. Decoupling where dependency poses clear risk, but maintaining our cooperation in less sensitive areas. So we're basically saying, take it easy. Take it easy. Critics might question whether the U.S. has the capacity, and that's very true, economically, politically, to decouple where it wants. It's expensive, especially in high capital sectors, and requires allies to coordinate. You got to get together with all your friends. China may respond with countermeasures, making decoupling itself a kind of economic conflict. So you have to be very careful here, okay? You have to be careful that this doesn't become something that gets out of control. You could talk tough, you could get ready. You could get ready for the discussion, but be careful. Don't talk too loud. Don't talk too fast. Don't talk too quick. So what do you need to watch for? Let me give you five things you need to watch out for. First thing is actual legislative or executive moves to restrict imports from China or to subsidize non-Chinese supply chain. That's the first thing you need to look out for. The second thing you need to look out for, trade or diplomatic retaliation from China in response to U.S. pressure. Number 3, coordination among allies. You have to see if they start to move together and they're making moves. If they allow U.S. thinking, decoupling, de-risking becomes more feasible. You need to watch for these moves. Now, the reason you need to watch for these moves is we've seen what happened to the stock market when the warning shots were sent, right? You've seen him, and the market took a bit of a dive, and we're assuming this is not for real. But the upcoming summit of high-level meetings between U.S. and Chinese leadership, whether China backs down from export control plans or double down. So you have to watch all these things. And we're watching out for you on this channel, because this channel, at the end of the day, is here to help you understand the geopolitical world and how it will impact your lives and also the stock market. So Bessent also said something quite interesting. He said, and I quote, we're going to bring everyone down, right? They're gonna pull everybody else down with them. What does that mean? In threatening that China is trying to pull everybody else down with them, Bessent is accusing Beijing, and this is in the past couple of days, of using its outside position in critical supply chains, rare earth and critical minerals, as a geopolitical lever. This is serious. He implies that China domestic problems are spilling over, and it's using export control or coercive measures to drag other economies into a downward trajectory. Now, what does that mean? Well, basically, if you can't get your rare earth mineral, you can't make phones, you can't build cars, you can't forget the weapons. Now, that could have an impact. That could have a very serious impact on the economy. Now, why would they do that? I mean, it's hard to believe that China wants to do this now. I mean, we know that eventually that's what they want to do, but do they really want to do this now? The framing suggests that China, sensing weakness, might choose to inflict damage on others, even at the cost of itself. And don't forget, the population really doesn't have anything to say at the end of the day, right? So it's easier for them to do things like that as a form of retaliation or bargaining. In effect, if you can't recover, at least make your adversaries suffer. And they're going to make people suffer if they actually go through with this. This could be a lot of damage. This is both a rhetorical escalation and a warning. Bessent is signaling that the U.S. and its allies see China's action not merely as protectionism or regulatory control, but as economically coercive and potentially destabilizing. Right now, Europe cannot afford this. Europe is in trouble right now. France is definitely in trouble. Germany making it, and so is Italy and everything else. But can they really afford to do that? So that argument matters. What is at stake? I'm going to give you 4 reasons as to what's at stake and what he's trying to achieve deep down. 1, by casting China's move as aggressive and harmful, not just to the U.S., but globally, Bessent aims to rally international support and make U.S. countermeasures like tariff, export controls, supply chain investment appear defensive rather than proactive. You see, these people are playing chess. They're moving pieces and they're trying to see and guess what the other player is going to do. And if you're able to plan accordingly, then you win. They're not just saying, I don't like you, right? They're not saying that. They're saying, I am not seeing the light. What does that mean? Right? I'm gonna oversky the sky for you so you can't see anything. And meanwhile, I'm making my moves. And for you, my subscribers, you need to understand what's happening. It's key for you to understand what's happening, because otherwise you're going to get flat-footed. We need to, and this is what the idea of the channel, right? The channel is about finding out where the next black swan is going to be, because that will impact the stock market, and that it has happened twice already in less than a week. So what are the arguments? So number 2, if China is framed as dragging the world down, then more aggressive U.S. actions, stricter import, de-risking, become easier to defend politically and diplomatically. That's what they're doing. Number 3, if middle powers, right, or U.S. allies perceive that China's action as destabilizing, they might be more willing to side with the U.S. in supply chain alignment, sanction, and trade restriction. Remember that the U.S. administration has asked the European to impose 100% tariffs on China, from buying oil from Russia. I mean, they didn't oblige, they didn't go along with it, but Number 4, this kind of strong language is a signal. It's a signal. It's a signal because China is being watched. Actions that destabilize supply chains or manipulate critical materials won't go unanswered. It's going to force the European to act accordingly. So now everybody's, quote unquote, ganging up on China. So what are the risks? Well, if China truly drags others down, it risks undermining its own export. And I will tell you that China is not doing well, right? China is slowing, right? So not so sure if that's a fact, right? China is actually having some issues. And that is something to watch out for because it is having potential issues with it actually slowing down. China is slowing down. And that's something to watch out for. Self-harm. If China truly drags, right? If it truly drags itself down because of what it's trying to accomplish, that's not going to be good, right? It's going to be a problem because it will have an impact on whatever it's doing. Give me a second. I want to make sure I got everything under control here. Right? So, credibility gap. The U.S. has to follow through. If Washington threatens retaliation but fails to act, the rhetoric loses credibility. Allies resistance. Some countries may not want to pick a side or risk economic damage by aligning overtly against China. Right? That is not something that they want to do. They don't want to be. The framing may contribute to escalatory dynamics. China might respond more aggressively, triggering further deterioration of trade relations. You got to be careful. You have to be extremely careful how you run this thing. Now, what else is going on? Well, is China actually really decoupling for real? Right? Are they really looking to decouple? Well, one might think that China is preparing for decoupling. Several policies, trends, and strategic signals suggest that Beijing is edging against overdependence on external factors, especially in technology, supply chain, and strategic minerals. That's a concern. So let me give you a couple of reasons. Let me give you 5 reasons why that is. First, the dual circulation strategy. So China has officially adopted a dual circulation model. One circulation is the domestic internal economy, and the other is external. This emphasis is on boosting domestic self-reliance, but the external circulation is not being abandoned. So it's rebalancing, not a full retreat. Right? So basically what we're saying is that in terms of domestic economy, consumption, supply, innovation, and the other is external international trade. So they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. Can they do it? That's the question. Number 2, they are pushing for higher domestic content supply chain control. Through programs like Made in China 2025, China has aimed to increase the share of domestic inputs. More broadly, Chinese industrial policy increasingly targets upstream controls, mining, materials processing, rare earth, new export control regime. So China is asserting control not just over export, but how its supply is embedded abroad. Um, Incremental de-embedding in global value chains. Some recent studies, listen to this one, suggest that China is slowly decoupling in parts of the global value chain domain, particularly in sectors sensitive to the US. China is shifting its participation in global trades, pushing more into upstream or intermediate goods rather than relying less on downstream consumer export to the US. So they basically, at the end of the day, China is looking to be friend with Russia, friend with India, with Asia, and just that's it. That's a big concern, because if that happens, the US could find itself isolated. And don't forget, wars have been started for less than that. In fact, lots of wars have been started for blockades, economic reason. Beijing is deepening engagement with the global south, diversifying its trading partners and investing in alternative supply chains in Africa, Latin America. This gives China optionality. If Western chains become hostile or unreliable, China has alternatives. Also, rhetorical shifts. China is less keen on binding itself to the US when those systems appear adversarial. And they've been getting ready since 2000, when China entered the World Trade Organization. Right? And since then, they've learned how to build and manufacture and being quite independent. It's the literally the engine of the industrial engine of the world. So if that engine turns against you and they're not building for you. And number 5, even while pushing for more self-reliance, China is careful not to spook its exporter or foreign firms. They're very careful. Right? The timing and calibration of restrictions appear designed to retain some flexibility, but you could see that the writing is on the wall. China still needs foreign investment, trade, and technology, so it's walking a fine line between self-protection and openness. So I think it's probably not going to happen today, but it started. In fact, I think the U.S. knew that at the beginning of the year. This whole idea of build in America, we need to start moving everything forward, folks. We have to start building more in America, because at some point, this is going to be becoming an issue, right? I mean, that's what the U.S. has been trying to do, and you could see the reasoning behind it, because now China is slowly pulling back. Is this for real this time? Probably not. The world is not ready for that, and it's a shame, because the market is doing quite well. But I mean, how much of it can you take? While full decoupling is unlikely, okay, in the near term. But despite the signal, many structural and practical constraints argue against a wholesale severing. I mean, China is deeply entrenched in global supply chains. You got to be kidding me. You can't just pull out. China is not just a final producer. It's a hub for manufacturing components, and assembly. Fully disentangling would be enormously disruptive. You could start a war over something like that. What do you mean? Because don't forget, the U.S. gets lots of its medication from China, right? The cheap medication, they get it from China. And so you can't get your medication, your solar panels and all these things and semiconductors, really? Number 2, decoupling is expensive. Retooling, relocating plants, shorter supply chains can mean higher costs, lower scale, and slower innovation. For China itself, cutting off deep trade linkages would reduce growth, foreign investment, market access, and technology inflows. That's why I don't believe that they're going to do it now, but this is a warning shot, right? So right now, at this point, I would say any kind of opportunity to buy in the weakness, I would buy, because they're not actually going to do the decoupling. But you have to start watching, because they're getting more serious. And the U.S. is also getting more serious. At some point, they're going to say, The door is closed. And that's not going to be good. The US and other powers also depends on part of China's supply chain. Some of the China's strength makes simultaneous decoupling unattractive for all parties. But yet, we are where we are, and the rhetoric is pretty strong. Maybe they're just preparing for the meeting. Maybe that's what they're doing. A dramatic break would risk large-scale economic shock, unemployment, debt stress, and social instability, all things the Chinese leadership tries to avoid. I mean, that's why you're seeing the market reacting the way it is. And again, like I said before, China has got lots of challenges. Right? China has a lot of challenges. China is not about to just, be able to do all these things on its own. China's number 5. China's economy is already configured for export-driven growth. It needs export. It needs clients. It needs customers. Integration in global value chains, and collaboration with foreign tech firms. Re-engineering that takes time and comes with friction. So, while there's talk of decoupling, I believe that the empirical data shows limit. Trade, investment, supply ties are still strong in many sectors, so I don't think it's going to happen. Therefore, if you see the market dropping because of it, you might probably want to buy like you would have done on Friday, because you would have done well on Monday. So what could this decoupling look like in practice? Right? What does this look like? Well, selective decoupling, right, in sensitive sectors, in semiconductors, advanced materials. China may try to fully localize the value chain, everything done in China. You could decouple 2.0, the hybrid approach. China maintains global trade in safe or low risk sector while isolating or protecting the strategic one. No more rare earth mineral for you, US. Number 3, gradual withdrawal, strategic disengagement. Over time, China might reduce openness in certain domains, scaling down joint ventures or licensing arrangement, pulling down. Don't forget, China, in terms of biotech, in terms of the creation and the invention of new molecule or discovery of new molecules, biotech is what we did a video on biotech in China. It might be a deep seek moment for biotech as well. They're doing quite well in terms of creation of the medication as well. Increase state control over foreign linked firm or joint ventures, tighten governance, force local data storage, insist on Chinese IP advantage, and limit profit repatriation. So this is actually happening, people, and I want you to understand that. Why do you need to understand it? Well, you need to understand it because it will impact your way of life. It could impact the defense of the US. It could impact the stock market if this actually happens tomorrow morning. It won't, obviously. That's crazy. Why would you even, consider such a situation? But at the end of the day, you've got China out there, and the rhetoric is since Friday, when the market dropped by 2.5% after the U.S. administration announced 100% tariffs. We have seen the rhetoric going higher and higher and higher and higher. And words such as you're gonna bring it all down. That's pretty strong. That's very strong wording. You could see the animosity that's starting to develop. Is this actually going to happen? Hopefully not. But you never know. These people are serious. On both sides. On both sides, they are very, very serious. And, you're playing hardball. And don't forget, right now, the U.S. is in a strong position, especially after the situation with Israel and the peace treaty. Well, it's not a peace treaty; it's a ceasefire. So the U.S. is up there. Now, of course, the U.S. is in the process, unfortunately, of having a government shutdown, which is going to enter its third, fourth week pretty soon. That also is very destabilizing. And don't forget the issue that the U.S. has that China really doesn't have is that it has $37 trillion worth of debt. This is a bullet you got to carry around. You got to manage accordingly, and it could become a major issue if it's not properly handled. So we need to monitor this situation very carefully. We need to make sure we understand what is happening. And hopefully, I mean, at the end of the day, I think they're talking tough and rough, but they don't actually mean what they say. Okay? They're just positioning. But be careful. Be careful, because you could be in a situation is you're ratcheting it up so high that you're not able to pull it back. And, don't forget that the Chinese way of governing is very different from the U.S., and there's only a few group of people deciding. And they from my understanding, the negotiator in China is very, 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 he's having a tough stance, a tougher stance than before, insulting almost. And we've seen how the U.S. reacts, right? And if that goes sideways, and if they're not able to control the situation, and they say too many things, they say, you know what, it's over. They have been trying to negotiate for the past 7 to 8 months, and they can't get together. But unfortunately for the U.S., he has had a problem with that, and he has a problem with India. Remember, the U.S. is not able to get India to the table, and is not able to get Russia to stop fighting with Ukraine. And so my concern is, everything is being ratcheted up. Now, is this going to be an issue, a war, or anything like that very soon? No. But you could get yourself in a situation at some point where you cannot extract yourself. Can you do without China? No. Can you pressure China? Yes. Is China weak at home? Yes. But that doesn't mean that they're just going to roll over, because this is part of their strategy, right? Their strategy, the global strategy, is decoupling. And you've seen them, all three of them, the Chinese, the Russian, and the Indian together. That's the future. Now, is the future next month? No. But that's something you have to prepare yourself for. And this is what the U.S. is trying to do. They're trying to prepare themselves to, in order for them to, we need to prepare, we need to present, we need to. But these things are extremely complex. I mean, look what the what's going on in Gaza, how long it took to do this thing, and it's not even halfway done, quite frankly. Maybe it may collapse at any time. So imagine trying to deal with China, and especially when you have countries that need each other right now. It could be very helpful to the U.S. in terms of its stock market, in terms of its people. Right? The U.S. relies heavily on China. And that is a problem for the U.S. because at some point it may not be able to sustain. Now, obviously, China is also, they're, like I just said, they relies heavily on other countries. I mean, we don't want to decouple, but it's like a divorce, right? You could see that they're not getting along anymore. Okay, you have to be realistic. They're not getting along, and it's time to have a divorce. And who's going to get the kids? That's what we're talking about. Who is going to get the kids? And they're all pulling each other on the side of the bed. I want them, you want them, but at some point, you still have to divorce. You go see a lawyer, and it's time to get to see a lawyer. It's time to pay up because it is time to separate. But when that happens, the U.S. better be ready to generate its own rare earth minerals. That could take 10 to 12 years, by the way, to dig your own. I mean, the U.S. is trying to build its infrastructure, but that's going to take some time. Number two, the U.S. is also trying to shore up its semiconductor facilities by investing in Intel and doing a bunch of things with Taiwan Semiconductors, but that's going to take some time. and the U.S. is forcing and pushing its defense sector to produce more. Although it's going to be very difficult to build, F-15 fighter pilot without, you know, without rare earth mineral, because each of them has about 900 pounds of this stuff. It's going to be very difficult to actually do it. So these are all the things that you need to worry about right now, because this could become a thing. And then when it becomes a thing, then the world is going to be very different. Now, of course, there's also an alternative, very small, but I would say 10%, is that if China literally locks out everything, then the US has no choice but to go to war to get the stuff. I know it's crazy, right? But this is how World War II was started with the Japanese. They had a blockade. They had nowhere to go. And what did they do? Well, they started a war in the Philippines and even in China. They're trying to expand. World War II was started for that reason. World War One as well. And take a look at some of the videos that I've done on that. So this is something that you need to not concern and worry yourself to death, but you need to be aware and understand, because this could have implication. This could have serious implication for the future.